We were just a bunch of nerdy kids who ignored the haters. We took their ridicule and we built on it. And when some of us gave up, well, we built on that too. Built resilience, built on a mission to make things a little better every day until the users came. Then the haters were VCs who scoffed at our audacity. This just isn't the way things are done. But we kept building. Users turned into teams, turned into companies, running their entire businesses on our apps. Then the software giants came after us. We weren't proven, we weren't fully featured, our radical cloud model wasn't secure. But we built on. And today, as companies adopt the cloud to move faster, teams are finding themselves slowed down by each other's efforts. The skeptics are claiming we'll never develop innovation at scale. But now, DevOps have come to the cloud, ushering in a new era of transformation. Companies can release on demand across hundreds of environments, innovating faster with fewer conflicts and fewer disruptions. There will always be challenges. There will always be naysayers. And we'll build on.
I'm Allison Park. I am a principal enterprise architect at Salesforce. You can find me on Twitter and LinkedIn. And if you do reach out through LinkedIn, please just add a note. I don't normally link in with folks I don't know, so it'd be real helpful to let me know who you are and that you attended this session. That'd be great. So let me tell you a little bit about myself too, as far as decluttering comes up. I've been in IT for about 25 years, maybe just a little bit more. And I've been in Salesforce for about 10 years. So I'm super excited about this. Worked on a Dreamforce facilitation, Circle to Success on decluttering, and have certainly worked with as a consultant on decluttering orgs. And I find it to be a super important concept and something that a lot of folks breeze past. So I wanted to start with a forward-looking statement. It felt right. I don't plan to make any forward-looking statements, but do make purchasing decisions around products that is currently available. So my inspiration for this session came from Marie Kondo. I have read all her books and certainly have experienced the joy of cleaning up a closet. And what struck me was she has a very structured philosophy around what she calls tidying, and certainly the motion of going through and cleaning up, and the idea that by cleaning up your environment, it can make a hugely positive impact on your life and things that may not necessarily be related. And I started thinking about applying that to our orgs. So today we're going to talk about decluttering, why it's important, how to get started, because I think that's the hardest part of decluttering is where to start, and then how to make tidying a part of business as usual so that you don't find yourself overwhelmed in the future by clutter in an org. And I will make the caveat that I'm going to be focusing on metadata decluttering as opposed to data decluttering, because data decluttering is just as important, but is a different approach and a different topic. So let's dig in. So first, let's define what org clutter is. I define it as unused or unhelpful metadata, things such as fields, unused classes, reports, page layouts that have more fields than needed, may not be up to date, may have things of a project that or functionality that's no longer used. I've even seen it where you're looking at things approaching governor limits. I have seen where you actually use up all the custom objects in a object and custom fields in an object and actually approach the governor limits. That can be extremely painful and certainly worth taking a look at how to clean it up. I'm sure we've all experienced how it's hard to figure out what is useful, especially when it comes to code. Where's this field used? Any of these kinds of ideas. and those heavily customized applications or pieces of functionality that make it difficult to make changes to it. If any of this sounds familiar, you are in the right place, and you're not alone. So the effects of clutter in our org, it certainly increases the time to maintain that org. Any change or any new person joining, including internal staff and consultants, is going to cost you time in figuring it out, time in getting your arms around it, understanding it, figuring out what's useful. It also decreases user adoption. Users don't want to come into a page layout or even a report folder that is just jam-packed with stuff, and they can't figure out where to start. It makes it very inefficient. Certainly, we've seen page loads are not as effective if we've got a lot of clutter on the page, things that aren't necessary, or just haven't been optimized for the way people actually use it. And it makes it very difficult to make changes or be able to be agile. You just can't be agile if you're really fighting against that clutter. So hopefully I've made the case that it's time to clean up the clutter, and I know it's not an easy undertaking, but let's get started. First thing you need to do is create a plan. Don't go on in and just grab things as you can, just like going in and cleaning a closet. You want to start thinking about how you're going to approach it. Make sure you've scheduled the time, you understand it, you've scoped it out, just like a good project. Another important thing is to get buy-in. So unlike if you have your own closet to declutter, you know you can make all the decisions as far as what stays and what goes. But when you're in an org, it's an org where you're collaborating with others. So it's very important to get buy-in. Make sure that others believe in the idea of decluttering, are with you in that effort. So make sure you're not going alone on that. Let's dig in a little bit further on how to get your plan in order. So there are a number of tools that come inside of Salesforce ready for you to work with and figure out this clutter that you've got. First of all, if you've got org documentation, that's the first place to start. I say if available because I know many of us don't have the luxury of good documentation, or certainly not complete documentation, or even up-to-date documentation. So whatever documentation you have, wherever you're starting, gather that up. Two things. One, you can fill in the gaps as you go through this process. And two, if you have up-to-date documentation, then as you make changes during your decluttering process, you can update it and keep it cutting edge. Also take a look at the system overview. System overview is a great place to start, to take a look at where everything stands, gives you an idea of certainly data storage, anything that can flag you that there may be an issue may be in this system overview, and it's a great thing as an admin, as an architect, as a developer, just to keep an eye on, understand where it's at, notice if there's a change, because that change can tell you if there's issues. Also, the schema builder is a real handy tool to let you know how the various objects relate to each other, especially if you think you might have an orphaned object or two that may be off on their own, or you're considering decluttering it or getting rid of it or deprecating it. That's a great tool to use. The other thing is the security health check. This is something that Salesforce has that lets you know what security features are toggled on or off. To figure out the right settings, it does give you a little bit of a KPI to tell you how sophisticated or secure your org is. And there's no right answer there, although pushing it as far as you can, meaning getting close to 100% is excellent. I think anything over 80 is fantastic, but do it very carefully because it can cause disruption, but it does create a much more secure org. And do pay attention with each of those. Make sure you understand exactly what you're toggling on and off, because those can be very, very powerful. The optimizer report. I think this is probably the gold standard, and I think it was in the winter release, actually, that the optimizer report came to be a standard part of Salesforce. run the optimizer report as a first step to give you a sense of where how everything is in your org. It's a great overall check. It will let you know about reports. It'll let you know about fields against those governor limits that I suggested. It'll even give you kind of a green, yellow, red indicator to tell you how close you are to limits. And then there's also a field footprint app that is available from Salesforce that can let you know how often those fields are used, where they're used, gives you an overall tool to really understand specifically on the field side of things. And that's actually available via a Trailhead badge that I will talk about a little bit later on. But these are a handful of the tools. I also want to make a shout out to Workbench. If you feel comfortable with Workbench, that's another place to go to. I know it can show you when a Visualforce page was last accessed. It's a good overall tool if you're comfortable with Workbench. So this gives you an idea of some reports. Pull those reports together to start to formulate your plan. The other thing I suggest, very similar to the way Marie Kondo lays out the plan for decluttering, is to start with the least painful thing to declutter. And I like to call out reports because that's something, it's easy to recreate a report. Very often you'll find there's a report that was created with perfectly good intentions, but never touched or hadn't been run in quite a while, and you can see when something was last run. And that gives you the opportunity to cull out reports that are no longer used. Another thing is page layouts, starting to cull those down, make sure that they're useful, understand who is viewing those, see if there's any profiles that are no longer used, and then you can start to dig into fields. And if you go roughly in this order, there's no perfect order, then you will find there are fields that you'll be able to eliminate because you've eliminated a report that was using or a page layout, and you'll just be able to cycle through that and do that much more efficiently. Again, get buy-in before moving forward. Don't go rogue. This is an org that you are sharing with all of the others in your organization. You want to make sure that they have buy-in, especially before you deprecate things. I know in the old days in IT, we used to deprecate something and see who screams. That's not a great plan. So do make sure you've got buy-in and support as you go through that. And do test your changes in a sandbox. I absolutely can't emphasize this enough. You don't want to go in and be surprised that something that you deprecated may have created an unintentional issue. So testing it and regression testing in a sandbox is the way to go. And make a backup. If you don't have a good way to manage what you, source control or anything already in the org, any kind of good DevOps tools, then simply make a dev org that'll back up all that metadata and set it to the side before you start. And then you can iterate over that as it makes sense. But having a backup, as I mentioned, a long career in IT, backups will save you every time. And then make tidying a regular part of the process. If you are using an agile work process, then every time try and understand, I'm going to deprecate so many fields or sunset functionality that I'm not using, maybe a certain percentage, some say as much as 25% to get rid of that technical debt, to get rid of it. Review your key decluttering metrics regularly. So those reports that I mentioned, like the optimizer report, if you run those on a regular basis, I like to run it quarterly. That will give you a good high water mark as far as you're starting to clean things up, and you can clean as slowly as makes sense for your org and to make sure you're making sense of things. How you're doing, what progress are you making, what things that were in red or were more of an issue, then you can see that progress, and that really helps. That's that kind of before and after photograph that always gives me a charge to know that you're making progress. And then do maintain documentation. Keep it up to date. It's super hard to do that, as is evidenced by the fact that many people struggle to keep their documentation up to date. But I'd like to emphasize, if you can, do maintain the documentation. It'll keep your sanity. So keeping those KPIs yes, determine what can be sunset, as I mentioned, and do indicate in your documentation when you're planning on deprecating something. If you see that there is an issue, then you can document that this is something that we expect to be deprecating, or where you think that only 1 or 2 people are using it. You put that in the documentation. That'll help guide you into the future. And another thing on code, as you start to touch code in future projects that may not have been touched in a while, take that opportunity to update the API level and refactor, and keep reviewing those reports to see how you're doing. So here are the resources. I do recommend reading the Marie Kondo books for inspiration. And this is the Trailhead module on the Optimizer report. So if you put in Salesforce Optimizer into Trailhead, that'll take you to a great Trailhead to help understand that report and also have that field footprint. And then there is a Vidyard video out there on Salesforce that you can watch on the Optimizer. And Elements Cloud Tools is a great way to document. They actually have a free trial out there for 14 days. So those are some resources for you to use. And then I also encourage you to see Bhavna Singh's session coming up that'll dig deeper into cleaning up and refactoring code. So that is coming up at 8:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And I think I've got time for a few questions.
Allison, can you see the Q&A panel, or do you want me to read it for you?
No, I can see it, so I will start going through. Is there a way to reorganize report folder? That is a great question. So I haven't seen a good tool to do that unless you're using some kind of DevOps tool to help you do that. You know, and to do it very carefully, understand what's being used and who's accessing it. So I don't have a good, handy, simple tool for you to use for reorganizing reports. So if someone else does, please put it in the Q&A and I'll read that out. Do you recommend documenting your changes? Absolutely. Keeping documentation, whether it's something like an Elements Cloud, like I mentioned, or some kind of just even Word or Google Doc, whatever makes sense for your organization, do document it, why you changed it, when you changed it, what you affected in those changes. I'm talking minimal DevOps because, like I said, I think I've found when I've made changes, I've been the one most grateful for doing my documentation. I can't remember what I did last week, much less 6 months ago. So when I make it, I like to remind myself why I did, what users, and who approved the changes. Any AppExchange apps or other non-Salesforce automated tools that people recommend for decluttering or analyzing an org? Elements Cloud is great. Capado is great. And I can't emphasize enough those free tools that are already in Salesforce. Start there. I've deleted all inactive processes in my org as we had too many pages. Was that something like going rogue? Potentially. You know, I think we all in for good reasons have deleted things. As long as you're understanding what that process and why it was inactivated and what's the whys behind it, it's possible you can't find that out. If they are inactive, as the admin or architect or developer, making sure that once they're inactive and that they are backed up someplace in another org, that probably is just fine, but always be cautious. I speak from experience in cleaning a little bit too vigorously and been thankful for a backup. How long would you recommend keeping deprecated fields, Apex, etc.? Would you just remove them directly or remove field level security as a first step for a short period of time? Actually, if you have no idea and there's no one in the organization telling you, hey, this is how we use this field or why we use this field or this class or something like that, that does make sense to set it aside. I generally use an 18-month high watermark because that will cover a year plus a little bit more. So if it's a once a year type function or field or anything like that, it'll usually shake out in that time. But there's no silver bullet. So, but 18 months is pretty reliable. What's your recommended approach to decluttering automation across multiple automation types? Of course, not best practice to mix and match multiple automation types within the same business process, but let's be honest, most orgs over 1 year old, yes, will have something like this due to the release of new features, implementation of third-party apps, etc. So again, just like I said, back up what you've got, and then you can refactor processes and flows, just like you can refactor Apex code. So take a time and do that so that you're basically coming out. You've inactivated the old one and you've input the new one, and then go through your testing process. I don't think I mentioned this, but never ever do anything in production like this. Always go through proper lifecycle development and make sure that you try it first in the dev org and then get it into some kind of user testing situation just to make sure that you're not going to inadvertently harm something, and then you can migrate it up. But yes, deprecating carefully and inactivating things is a good idea as you start to move into the new, whatever that may be. Would it be possible to paste the resource links into the Q&A, please? Yes, I think I can do that. And you know what I'll do, Christy and everyone on the line, is if you go to my Twitter site, I will make sure to tweet it out after the session. That might be a little bit more durable. Is there a report that shows what code isn't being used anymore? I haven't found anything like that. I've wondered about that too. But what I have done is basically do a map, like a lucid chart, of all the classes and what calls what, and figure out if there is a piece of code that's not being called, or if it maybe just got commented out somewhere along the line. And that's helped tremendously, just to be able to map out this calls this and then this calls this, so that you can start to understand how those interact. And again, I'll share those links on Twitter, I promise. And has Salesforce ever promoted their new standard objects, and how to change the custom objects to the new ones? I think what you're asking is if Salesforce comes out with a new standard object and you've got a custom object that's doing the same thing, there isn't a silver bullet in the way to handle that, and you probably want to think very carefully on the use case as far as how you change those over, and you would treat it just like migrating any kind of object, of testing and then slowly deprecating over into that new functionality. Is the field footprint part of Optimizer, or is it a separate tool? It is a separate tool. And you'll be able to link to it through that Trailhead module I mentioned, which I'll also put in Twitter. And what is the #1 area to start with, in your opinion, when decluttering? I do think it's reports, because those proliferate really fast. Super easy to replace. Generally, you don't shut down the whole ship when you declutter those, and you can also put them in an archive folder.